Picture a group of hedgehogs on a cold night. The temperature keeps falling, and each one feels the same pull. Move closer, share the warmth, survive. So they do. They press together, huddle into a single mass of bodies, and for a moment, it works. Then the spines start to dig in. One by one, they flinch, they pull apart, and the cold returns immediately, sharper now because they know what warmth felt like. So they drift back together, and the spines find skin again. Apart, they freeze. Together, they bleed. There is no arrangement where both problems disappear at once. Eventually, after enough of this, after enough retreating and reapproaching, they find a distance. Not close enough to draw blood, not far enough to lose the warmth entirely. A tolerable middle place. Not comfort, not connection either in the way they first imagined it. Something more modest, something that simply lets them survive the night. That image belongs to Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most unsparing minds in the history of philosophy, and it has quietly become one of the most repeated ideas about human closeness, usually for the wrong reason. Here is how it gets used today. Someone gets hurt by a friend, a partner, a parent. They go looking for a way to make sense of it, and they land on this parable, and they walk away with a simple lesson. Keep your distance. Protect yourself. The people who get close enough to matter are also the people positioned to wound you, so the smart move is to never let anyone get that close again. It is a tidy conclusion. But what if protecting yourself was never the answer? What if the story you just heard has been misread for 200 years by almost everyone who has ever repeated it? Here is the promise of this video. Everyone thinks this story teaches you to keep your distance. By the end, you will see why Schopenhauer believed almost the exact opposite. Schopenhauer used the image of the hedgehogs to describe a problem, not to prescribe a solution. And the solution most people quietly graft onto it, the guarded, self-protective distance, is closer to the disease than the cure. To understand why, it helps to know what kind of philosopher was building this parable in the first place. Schopenhauer was not writing self-help advice for the salon crowd of his day. He was working out one of the more radical metaphysical systems of the 19th century, one that treated the entire visible world, other people included, as the surface of something far stranger underneath. Before we go there, it helps to know where this man was actually standing when he wrote it. His mother, Johanna Schopenhauer, kept a literary salon in Weimar that drew some of the most celebrated minds of the era, Goethe among them. She was witty, sociable, ambitious. Her son was none of those things in company. Intense, argumentative, unwilling to soften himself into pleasant conversation. After his father's death, something shifted. Johanna started building a life of her own. New friends, new admirers, a new social world, with less and less room reserved for the difficult young man who kept correcting people at her dinner table. He felt it. He pushed back. She pulled further away. There was no single dramatic break. No one slammed a door. It was slower than that. An accumulation of small disappointments on both sides, the kind that hardens into permanent distance without either person quite choosing it. Decades passed. Reconciliation never fully came. It would be too simple to say his philosophy was just autobiography with footnotes, but it is honest to say this. A man who wrote so precisely about disappointed expectation, about wanting someone to be a certain way and watching them insist on being themselves instead, had lived that exact wound inside his own family, long before he gave it a philosophical name. He did not theorize disappointment from a distance. He grew up inside it. Here is a version of something you may already know, without a name for it. A man spends 10 years believing he understands his best friend completely, their loyalty, their limits, what they would and would not do for him. Then, in a single afternoon, over something as small as a missed favor during a hard month, the friend chooses himself. Just once. Just when it mattered most. And the man spends the next year wondering how he misjudged someone so badly, He did not misjudge them. He just never asked the deeper question. Schopenhauer's answer to that question was strange for a philosopher, and it is worth sitting with, because everything else in this video depends on it. He argued that underneath every action, every desire, every so-called choice a person makes, there is a single blind force driving it. He called it the will. Not will in the sense of willpower, not intention. Think of it instead as a current. Picture two rivers that have run side by side for years, close enough to look like one system, until the landscape shifts. A drought upstream, a fallen ridge of rock, and the rivers drift apart, each one simply following gravity, following its own bed. Neither river betrayed the other. Neither river chose anything at all. It just kept moving the only way it could. That is what Schopenhauer thought was happening beneath every human choice too. A ceaseless, directionless striving toward more survival, more satisfaction, more continuation, that never actually reaches contentment for long, and answers to nothing outside itself. So when the friend chose himself during that hard month, something in him was moving the way a river moves, following its own bed, not plotting against anyone. That is a claim about metaphysics, not a verdict on ethics. Schopenhauer is not saying the friend owed nothing, or that the choice sits beyond judgment. He is saying that before you judge it, it helps to see what produced it. The will explains the current. It does not settle the separate question of what the friend still owes, or what the friendship can still hold after it. This does not excuse cruelty. It relocates where the explanation comes from, without relocating the responsibility. Once you see that, the question stops being only, how could he do this to me? And becomes, first, what produced this? And only after that, what does he owe me now? There is a second half to this, and it is stranger still. Schopenhauer argued that everything we perceive, other people included, reaches us only as representation, not the thing itself, the version of it assembled by a mind built for survival, not accuracy. The friend the man believed he knew for 10 years was always partly a construction, a character built out of fragments, filled in with hope and convenience. When the friend acted against the character, it felt like betrayal. What actually broke, though, was the construction, not the man underneath it. There is a name for the thing that made this so hard to see in the moment. Schopenhauer called it the principium individuationis, the principle of individuation. It is simple to state. You are over here, other people are over there. Your suffering is yours, their choices are theirs. It feels obvious. It might be the most convincing illusion you carry. Think about a marriage that quietly comes apart, not from an affair, not from any single betrayal, just from two people who slowly stopped being able to give each other what the other one needed. From the outside, it looks like one partner simply stopped trying. Look again. Two expressions of the same underlying current reached a point where they could no longer serve each other, and each one, following that current, moved to protect its own continuation. What felt like abandonment was really a collision between two rivers that had run together for a while and then didn't anymore. Or think about a parent who could never quite show up the way a child needed, not out of malice, out of a current shaped by scarcity or fear, or a version of striving that never left room for anyone else's needs. The adult child is still waiting, years later, for an apology that treats the failure as a choice. Schopenhauer's metaphysics can explain why the parent failed, without erasing the fact that they did. Understanding the current that moved through someone is not the same as concluding that nothing they did was ever really theirs to answer for. He kept those two things separate on purpose. The deep explanation underneath a person's failure, and the practical responsibility they still carry for it. One does not cancel the other. So the wound is real. The failure was still a failure. What changes is only the story you tell yourself about why it happened, not whether an apology or accountability is still owed. That does not erase the wound. It only adds a second layer underneath it. Or think about two siblings, close as children, who grow into adults who barely speak. Nobody did anything dramatic enough to explain the distance. One sibling built a life that required constant motion, a new city, a demanding career, less and less bandwidth for anyone who was not directly in front of them. The other stayed close to home and slowly came to read the silence as rejection, as evidence that they had simply mattered less. Two currents, still moving, just no longer running through the same channel they once shared as children under the same roof. None of this is Schopenhauer's answer yet. It is the diagnosis. And a diagnosis, on its own, can curdle into cynicism just as easily as it can ripen into wisdom. Everything depends on where you take it next. Even if you could somehow calibrate your expectations perfectly, low enough that nothing could ever disappoint you again, Schopenhauer would say you still would not arrive at peace. There is another piece of the picture standing in the way, the pendulum between suffering and boredom. You know this one already, even if you have never named it. Someone spends years wanting the house, finally gets it. 6 months later, the excitement has flattened into routine, and they are already circling a new want, a bigger kitchen, a different neighborhood. Someone spends years chasing the ideal job, gets the offer. Within a year, the same restlessness that used to point at, "I wish I had this job," quietly repoints itself at, "I wish this job were different." Relationships work the same way, and this is the part almost nobody says out loud. Someone finally gets the partner who shows up exactly the way they always wanted, attentive, constant, choosing them every day without being asked. For a while, it feels like a rival. Then something creeps in. Restlessness. A faint dissatisfaction with no obvious cause. Sometimes even boredom with the very steadiness that was supposed to be the whole point. That is not proof the relationship failed. That is the pendulum, doing exactly what Schopenhauer said it always does, swinging from the ache of wanting to the flatness of having, and back again. Here's the strange part. None of this was ever really about getting other people to finally meet your expectations. Even total success at that would not land where you think it would. Remember the promise from the start of this video, that Schopenhauer believed almost the exact opposite of keep your distance. Here is where that promise gets paid off. Almost everyone who tells this story gets it wrong. Here is where nearly every popular retelling of the hedgehog parable quietly stops. Right at the moment they can hand you the advice to protect yourself. Stay guarded. Become someone who does not need anyone enough to be hurt by them. It sounds like wisdom. It is closer to half the picture. Because Schopenhauer did not actually end at self-protection. His ethics, laid out most directly in his writing on the basis of morality, arrive somewhere almost the opposite of guarded distance. Here is the part nearly everyone leaves out. If the principium individuationis is the illusion that separates you from everyone else, then seeing through that illusion, even partially, does not lead to armor. It leads to compassion, what he called Mitleid, literally a suffering with. Once you recognize that the person who disappointed you is not a separate, hostile agent, but another current, moving through the same blind striving that moves you, the honest response is not to wall yourself off. It is to feel the kinship, even in the exact moment they have hurt you. This is a very different foundation for ethics than the one most people grow up with, where being good means following a rule, regardless of how you feel. Schopenhauer's compassion is not a rule you obey. It is a recognition you cannot unsee once you have actually seen it. The moment the boundary between your suffering and someone else's stops feeling quite so solid. This is the real center of the parable. It is almost never where people leave it. The hedgehogs do not solve their problem by learning to stay apart forever. They solve it by finding the distance that lets the warmth continue at all, which requires staying close enough to keep feeling what the other one feels. If that distinction landed for you, the difference between guarding yourself and actually understanding what you were guarding against, leave one word in the comments: quills. Just that. No need to explain it. Think about the ordinary version of this. A friend cancels again. The practiced response kicks in. Take it personally, file it away as more proof you cannot rely on people, quietly withdraw a little more of yourself as insurance against the next letdown. The Schopenhauerian response asks something harder, not to pretend the cancellation did not sting, not to perform forgiveness you do not feel, just to notice that this person too is carrying the same blind current you are, pulled by pressures you may not see, disappointing you not as a verdict against your worth, but because that is what the current does in everyone given enough friction. You are allowed to still feel the sting. You are also allowed to let it sit next to an understanding that never turns into a wall. Now take it to a marriage, years in, where the resentment has become background noise. Two people, each privately convinced the other stopped trying first. Compassion does not mean pretending the resentment is not real. It means asking, underneath it, what current has been running each of them so dry that neither one has had anything left over for the other. Take it to a workplace where a colleague takes credit for something that was yours. Compassion does not mean staying silent about it. It means understanding, without excusing, that the colleague is likely running from a fear of being overlooked that has nothing to do with you at all, and choosing your response from that clarity instead of from raw insult. Take it, finally, back to the adult child still waiting for an apology that will treat the old failure as a deliberate choice. Compassion does not require inventing an apology that will never come. It only asks a different question underneath the old one. Not, why didn't they choose me? But what current was moving through them that left so little room for anyone else? That question does not fix the past. It changes what the person carrying it has to carry. Every idea this honest deserves to be pushed until it breaks. And this one breaks in a specific place. Compassion without any boundary at all does not lead to peace. It leads to self-erasure. There is a version of seeing through the illusion of separation that curdles into something else entirely. The person who understands everyone's pain so thoroughly that they stop protecting any of their own. They absorb every disappointment, excuse every repeated harm, tell themselves that since the other person is just as caught in the current as they are, nothing that person does can really be held against them. That is not the compassion Schopenhauer was describing. That is a hedgehog with its spines filed off entirely. This failure shows up most clearly in people who mistake understanding for obligation. Recognizing that someone else is caught in the same blind current as you is not the same as owing them unlimited access to your time, your patience, your body. Schopenhauer's compassion was meant to soften judgment, not cancel discernment. You can fully grant that a person's cruelty grew out of their own depleted current and still decide, with clear eyes, that you will not keep standing close enough to be cut by it. The two things were never in conflict. Somewhere along the way, a lot of well-meaning people convinced themselves they were. The real position, the one the parable was pointing at from its very first line, sits between these two failures. Not the guarded distance that never lets anyone close, not the boundaryless closeness that lets anyone in at any cost. Something closer to what the hedgehogs eventually found. Near enough to still feel the warmth, and to still feel what the other one feels, but not so near that you stop noticing you are bleeding. Picture the hedgehogs again, one more time. Not frozen apart, not pressed painfully together. Settled at that middle distance they had to find the hard way, through repeated retreat and repeated return. It is easy to look at that distance and call it coldness, a smaller, sadder version of the closeness they wanted at the start. But look again. They are still close enough to feel each other's warmth, close enough to feel in some small way what the others are feeling. What changed is not how much they care. What changed is how honestly they see the cost of caring, and how carefully they now carry it. Maybe people were never meant to stop having quills. Maybe we simply had to learn how close we could stand. See you in the next video.